Hello, everybody. It's Mitchy by nature here because I'm going to do something. Uh, I think I have an addictive personality. And by that, I mean I think I become addicted to things. And addiction has been interesting to me for a while. Like, what is this thing that we've called addiction right here? Right? Like, oh, that's the eraser. I've got this program called Good Notes. Good Notes. It's awesome for taking notes and stuff, and it lets me do things like this. So I'm going to screen capture myself reading Gabor Mate's In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction, which I got on Kindle. And the reason why I want to read it is because I know of his work. He's a profound medical doctor who specializes in addiction, as far as I know. And he's on the board of he's in an advisory role to Numinous Wellness out on the West Coast, which is a psychedelic wellness company. And I've mentioned them before. And he's just made some pretty incredible discoveries, I think. And I haven't read this book before, so I'm going to read it through I'm also going to listen to the audiobook on my own time. But I'm going to go page by page with you on this with the hope of understanding what an addiction is. And like for me personally, an addiction is something that you can't stop doing. Even though you are aware that you're doing it. And it's very seductive. Like, it gets you off of your path. Like, it's not good. I don't think you can be addicted to good things. Like, you can't be... addiction does not equal, like, progress or growth. You can't be addicted to growth. I don't think you can be addicted to growth, because to be addicted to growth would mean that you're constantly engaging with novelty, which would undermine any sort of pattern, a negative pattern, that, like, because addictions do seem kind of like rhythmic almost, or patterns that repeat against our will. And so they're like, you can't be addicted, you can't have a pattern of growth, because growth is sort of a meta pattern. If anything, it's when you're growing, if you're engaging with novelty and you're learning, it actually destroys a lot of your preconceptions, which is what growing feels a lot like. It's like if you have a thought, right? If you have an idea and you say, okay, I believe that, like, for example, making money will make me happy. That's my thought. That's my claim. Well, you can believe that, right? Which is fine. But you can also seek to refute that, which is scientific. And so if you have a claim that says that making money is going to solve my happiness problem, you can test that by looking into areas where people who don't make money are still happy. For, like, if by looking at contrary evidence, it actually tests your thesis in such a way that it makes it stronger, but that often feels like it's an attack on your belief system or your identity. But growth, I don't think growth can happen without breaking patterns. So an addiction is patterns. It just happens over and over and over and over and over again. And yet the results of the addiction are always the same, which is usually destabilization and regret and loss and pain and all these things. So that's what I think that. I'm erasing it. That's what I think addiction is. But I'm also reading this book because he knows more about addiction than I do, and I want to learn. So I'm not saying that this is right or true. It's just an idea, and now I'm trying to learn from people who know more than me. So this is what, and Gabor Mate, this is him, that's him. Look him up online. It's really worth your time. Introduction. It's February 2018, 10 years after the publication of In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. I step out of an elevator at a San Francisco hotel. From across the lobby, a stranger rushes up, arms open. My son died of an overdose. It was incomprehensible to me, but on reading your book, I understood why it happened. Wow. The tearful embrace of even one grieving father validates the writing of this book and the work behind it. Over the last decade, people from all walks of life throughout the world have written to describe the book's impact on themselves or on the lives of loved ones, on the view of addicted humans and what addiction is, how it helped open their hearts to the enormity of the problem. It has inspired songs and poetry in Canada and the US, paintings in Spain, theater productions in Romania and Hungary, and is now used in learning institutes, in addiction counseling programs, and in treatment facilities. Especially rewarding given the growing crisis in addictions are reports from young students who describe how they have been motivated to become counselors or pursue medicine and psychiatry to help people as those depicted and given expression in these pages. A social worker from Los Angeles wrote, "Our cops have floored me. They've put hope in my jaded heart. There is one in particular who has taken the harm reduction model in the realm of hungry ghosts as a guide. When he identifies candidates, he approaches them with respect and creative compassion." Creative compassion. That's very interesting. What's that? The book has found a place in prisons. Counselors have told me of inmates who wept when they saw their stories reflected in those pages or some of the associated talks I've given. Your book enabled me to pinpoint the cause of my addiction. A man incarcerated in Idaho wrote, "I can now answer the question family and friends have asked me for decades. Why?" Wow. The question why has never been more urgent than now. I also want to add in my own things as I do this. Like, this question of why is about why do we do what we do? Why do you do what you do? Right? And there is never a more urgent time than right now. Like, this right now is when you need to ask yourself why you do what you do. That's sort of like in my personal life, like everything is, I feel like it's good and it's been getting better, but I have had a relapse into something that I thought I had gotten over. And you might say, like, I mean, I can give you details if you want. I'll just speak. I don't want to go into it too much because it's not that big of a deal, but it is to me. And it's just because I'm pretty self-reflective and I really want to make sure that I'm telling if I'm living out the truth. Like, I can't lie to myself. And I have this general theory that we human beings are addicted to thought. And how does that manifest? Well, that's what I'm going to kind of explore as I read the book. Because I think, if you're listening to me right now, have you ever considered the thought that you are addicted to thoughts? That you are addicted to using your mind to figure things out? And there is no guarantee that that is actually going to help you, especially if it becomes a addicted process. If thinking is okay, but if you become addicted to thinking, what happens is that you defer to it without thinking. You get into this cycle. Like, if you think of like what an addiction is, it's this, like, it's almost this compulsion towards something. Like, you have to go there, and if you resist, it like, you get vicious and ugly and desperate and even crazy because you need to serve the addiction, because the addiction is so intense. But it's only intense if you don't give into it. If you give into an addiction, it's like this pleasure release, obviously. So it's easy to give into an addiction. Even knowing, like, full well that what you're about to do is not good for you, it's still easier to give into the addiction than it is to abstain from the addiction. And I think we do that with thinking. I think we give into our thoughts way too easily. And over time it just becomes, that's just what we do. We just immediately turn to our thinking to solve our problems. And what I'm proposing is that thinking isn't bad. Thinking is just part of, day-to-day life. But thoughts can interrupt your life. Thoughts can interrupt your growth. Thoughts interrupt your growth. Like, you can't think your way into growing. You need to actively engage with reality in order to grow. And so this question down here, the question of why do we do what we do, leads us to growth. Questioning our thoughts leads us to growth. Not just because you've done something before doesn't mean you should do it again, right? Especially if it's easy. Because things that are easy, okay, well, I mean, like, there's so much I could talk about, but I want to stay to the book. As I write this introduction, an opioid overdose crisis rages. Every 3 weeks in the United States, as many people die of overdoses as did in the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks. Wow. Britain, which has Europe's highest proportion of heroin addicts, last year saw drug-related fatalities hit a record high. In England and Wales, over 3,700 people died, mainly from heroin and related opioids. In Canada, the numbers are similarly distressing. According to the National Public Health Agency of Canada, reports of March of 2018, there were more than 4,000 opioid-related fatalities in Canada in 2017, representing nearly 50% increase over the previous year, affecting every part of the country with devastating effects on families and communities. My home territory of British Columbia sustained 125 overdose deaths in just 1 month this past January, according to Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry. It used to be thought, Dr. Henry told me, that overdoses just happened to those people there, meaning Skid Row areas such as Vancouver's drug-notorious downtown east side, where this book opens and ends, and where much of its action takes place. In 2016, British Columbia declared a public emergency, in part, says Dr. Henry, to shift the conversation from a localized emergency to the broader social problem it is. This is not those people. This is our people, our brothers and sisters, families. Overdose deaths happen in all neighborhoods, from the richest to the poorest. For all the genuine alarm and grief over this carnage, it is too easily comforting for us to believe that these deaths are due only to individual predilections or habits. On social and political levels, they represent human sacrifices. People are falling victim to our society's long-term disinclination to come to terms with the realities and root sources of addiction, especially of substance abuse. This is really interesting. People are falling victim to our societies. People are falling victim to our society's long-term disinclination to come to terms with realities and root sources of addiction. Realities. Root sources. So, this is worth pausing over. Our society. I mean, how do we say, so, okay, what the question is, what is reality? And I know it's a hell of a question, right? Realities. He says the disinclination, meaning I don't want to look. I'm going to procrastinate on looking, to come to terms with the realities and root sources of addiction, the reality of addiction, the reality of the root source of addiction, right? I mean, I hope to understand addiction better by reading this book, but if you just pause for a second and think about, like, what is reality itself, a lot of people over the years have said it's here right now. That's what reality is. It's here right now. It's being in the moment. In the moment. And when you're in the moment, you're as real as you can possibly get. And so one of the things that I would say is that thoughts aren't I can't spell. Thoughts aren't real. Thoughts aren't real. You see, because when you're in the moment, you aren't. If you're in the moment, if you're this person here, right, and they're standing in the moment, and they have a thought, right, about, that person over there, this person in the bubble is not real. The person in standing there is real. So, like, for example, right now I'm sitting here on my couch with my iPad, and I can look around my room and I can see the growing plants over there and my cognitive bias poster and those things that help me do pull-ups in the door frame and the TV, and I can look out the window at the trees, and, like, all of that is happening here in the moment. But to you right now, listening to my voice, that's not real. It's not real because you are attending to the sound of my voice, but you're also in your own reality. If you can put yourself in the moment, like with meditation or mindfulness exercises, you are basically attending to what is happening right now. Right now. That's what's real. Right now is what's real. And a lot of what we do with our time is to get away from being here right now, especially if we don't want to be where we are right now. So if I'm not going to claim to know how to, unpack what addiction is, and I know the solution to addiction, but it has a lot to do with reality, is like, the feeling of like a desire, right? Like desire is an interesting word, right? Desire is a thought. When you desire a cookie, you're actively engaging with the future that the cookie exists in, because if you are eating the cookie, you're in the moment. You're in the moment if you're eating the cookie. But if you don't have the cookie yet, you're thinking about wanting the cookie. You're engaging with a desire, which is a thought, which isn't real. Now, if you get the opportunity to engage with the cookie, to eat the cookie, right, you're going to have that moment where you can choose not to. And when you choose not to eat the cookie, why are you doing that, right? Why? That's the question that we need to ask now. Why are you doing what you're doing? If you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, then who is doing it? Right? Who is doing it? Is it the one in the bubble, or is it the one in real life? Because the bubble one is not real. The bubble one is not real. So if you default to a illusion, you're never going to be living in reality. And what's that going to manifest as down the road is that you're going to be more inclined over time to escape reality for illusion. And that's what I think addiction is. Addiction is, I don't want to be here now, so I'm going to leave the present moment by stimulating myself with some kind of activity. And you might say, well, of course, Mitch, like, boredom sucks, and what do you expect me to do? Just meditate all day? And it's like, no, I'm just asking you to ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing. Because isn't it often the case that you don't want to have the cookie because you're thinking about the future, and you're saying to yourself, if I have the cookie, then I'll get fat, or I won't feel good, or I need to save money, or it's always about something economical about the future. And I mean, like, economists think about the future not in like this moral finger wagging way, but like in a self developmental kind of way. Like, think about yourself as a growing thing. Addiction cuts back at your growth in the same way infringing on any plant that's growing stops their growth. I mean, there's more to it than that, but it's basically like, when you abstain from your desires, you have to kind of justify it, right? Like, it's easy to give into your desires. You give into your desire and you say like that, I want it. Well, why do you want it? Well, I don't care why I want it. Because it tastes good, or because it feels good, or whatever. I just want it. Give it to me now. Whereas when you abstain from a desire, it's like, do you want this pleasure? And you say, you know what, I've had it in the past. I actually don't mind not having it right now. All you're doing at that moment is you're creating a justified reason for why you're doing what you're doing. You have to justify yourself against the stimulation. And if you can come up with a reason to stop yourself from the stimulation, those reasons are going to help guide you towards self-development, right? Because why else do they exist? You know what happens if you keep giving into your desires. Not only do the desires themselves become less and less meaningful over time because of exposure, but you actually get weaker at saying no to the very thing that you don't even get very much pleasure from anymore. And that's addiction. That's the definition. I think that's one of the definitions of addiction, is that pattern. Not only that, that's the negative outcome stream, but the positive outcome stream is the more you control yourself, the more self-control you will have, which means you can basically extrapolate into the future and say, well, you know, I actually do want this future. Well, then you realize that it's very much a part of your ability to function. That's what gets you or does not get you what you want. I believe that we get what we want, but we just don't know what we want. Now, if you become aware of what you want, you will get it, but it will require a tremendous amount of sacrifice. And sacrificing what? You're sacrificing your desires. And you're sacrificing what's not real but feels good for what's real and might not feel good, because to resist a desire often doesn't feel good. Resisting desires hurts a lot of the time. Resisting addiction hurts a lot of the time. It's like you feel like all sorts of rationalizations to get you to do the things that you know you shouldn't be doing. And that's why it hurts. But you also can understand that if you realize that the desire itself is not what you want, you can, first of all, you can engage with that thought in a more realistic way, as opposed to engaging with the illusion. And then you can create a better reality because you're more engaged with reality. I mean, that's what I think. And I'll just get back to the book here. Over the decades, in the face of all evidence, we have refused to demand or embrace policies that would prevent or properly address the ravages of addiction. As David Walker, inaugural chair of Public Health Ontario, has sharply and aptly noted in a letter to the Globe and Mail, March 17, 2018, in 2003, a new and frightening epidemic struck Canada, mostly in Toronto. 44 people died from SARS. The provincial and federal governments reacted powerfully. 15 years later, opioid addiction, another new and frightening epidemic, is striking Canada. One wonders why our collective response is relatively so muted. Is it because we value those who are dying less? Is this caring society we are becoming? Well, I remember Mitch Hedberg had this really funny joke about alcoholism is the only disease that you can get yelled at for having. It's like, God damn it, Joe, you have lupus. God damn it, Joe, you're an alcoholic. You know, it's sad, but it's true. As with many other human problems, there exist what are called proximate causes to the escalating epidemic, causes that immediately contribute to the tragic outcomes, Anyone reading or watching the daily news today is aware that salient amongst the proximate causes is the recent wide availability of the cheap and potent manufactured opioids fentanyl and carfentanil. These drugs, compared with their plant-derived relatives, heroin and morphine, have a much narrower margin of safety. That is, the difference between a dose that will get one high or out of a withdrawal and one that will kill is much smaller, hence their lethality. Dire a threat as they pose, potentially suicidal habits form only the tip of a huge iceberg. Our society, with people increasingly desperate to escape the isolation and dismay of their daily lives, is rife with every manner of addiction, with more arising all the time. Internet addiction appears to be a common disorder that merits inclusion in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, which I have. It's on my bookshelf. Suggested in an editorial in an American Journal of Psychiatry the same year this book appeared, and how much more commonly recognized a disorder it has been since then. So that's pretty astounding if you hear what he's talking about, right? Our society, with people increasingly desperate to escape the dismay of their daily lives. So that's again, to bring it back to the question is why? 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 Why do you do what you do? And I also realized that is a threatening question. Like, you have to actually come up with reasons, justifications for what you're doing with your life. And that doesn't feel good sometimes, but the sinister, insidious alternative is addiction. And what is addiction? Remember, the way I'm thinking about addiction right now is a pattern of behavior that over time diminishes one's ability to function in the real world. Forgive my dog barking, but that's part of reality. Why did I say real world? Because the real world is like, addiction gets you out of the real world. Attending to the real world is as simple as doing the next thing that you're doing. Now, we have this, thing called thought that takes us out of the real world and moves us into the future or the past, neither of which are real. You understand that, right? Does that make sense? If you have a person's mind here, there's their person, and they're like, they're not sad or happy, they're just, they're just alive. And this is the future on this side. I'm going to change the color. This is the future. Okay, and then this is the past. Okay, I don't like the shape of that S. The past, past and the future. Okay, and then this guy's the now, or the moment. For example, right now you're listening to me talk to you. You're also somewhere else, and maybe you're walking, or maybe you're driving, or maybe you're eating, or maybe you're doing something. There is something else, quote unquote, happening right now. The question I would ask you is, why aren't you attending to that? Why aren't you just driving? Why aren't you just walking? Why aren't you just sitting and listening? Why do you have to do something else? And maybe you're not. Maybe you are just listening. Well, if you are just listening to me right now, that means that maybe you have a notebook out and you're taking notes alongside me. That's being real. Everything else, if you're doing something, if you're multitasking, that is building an illusion. And you might say, Mitch, well, no, it isn't. Like, that's being functioning at my peak. You know, that's me getting everything I need to get done. I'm like, don't get me wrong. Like, it's not like you're not allowed to multitask, but just consider what's actually happening when you multitask. What's actually occurring in the real world, right? The individual's mind, this person, right, is split. You know, you're distracted. The question is, why can't you just walk? Why can't you just drive? Because it's boring? Right? Are you just trying to get away from boredom? Well, then the question is, why are you trying to get away from boredom? What's so bad about boredom? What is boredom? See, these don't have to be answered now, but I definitely want you to think about this stuff. And if any of this stuff is like you don't agree with, or you have an opinion on, like, I definitely want to hear it, because this is just what I think and act out. But this is, have you thought about this? A pattern of behavior that over time diminishes one's ability to function in the real world. That's what an addiction is. That's how I would define an addiction. You can be addicted to thought. And how does that manifest? Well, if you have a pattern of thinking that over time diminishes your ability to function in the real world, you're addicted to thought. And how would that manifest? Well, the individual isn't, for example, if you go on social media, I mean, that social media is an addiction in and of itself. Like, if you can't stop yourself from going on social media, you're addicted to social media. And so if you can't stop yourself from thinking stuff, right? If you don't question your thoughts, that's probably the simplest way to put it. If you don't question the validity of your thoughts, you're addicted. If you don't question the validity of your thoughts, you're addicted. If you don't challenge your thoughts, you're addicted to your thoughts. What does that mean? That means that over time, what that's going to result in is a skewed version of the world. Like, your presuppositions will become more real to you than the real world. Okay? So, I mean, I'm not going to go into all of that right now, but I just want to bring it up because of this fucking paragraph is amazing. I mean, our society, with people increasingly desperate to escape the isolation and dismay of their daily lives, is rife with every manner of addiction. Recently, an article in Psychology Today discussed internet gaming disorder. Smartphones are another major new addictive focus. New York psychotherapist Nancy Collier reported that most people now check their smartphones 150 times per day, or every 6 minutes, and young adults are now sending an average of 110 texts per day. 46% of smartphone users now say their devices are something they couldn't live without. A classic sign of addictive dependency. You see what I mean? So remember, this is Mate, is a medical doctor who specializes in addiction. And he's saying that this stuff, like, what does it mean to not be able to live without a thought? You're not allowing yourself to challenge it. Like, just think about it again. Like, what is desire, right? You want the cookie. Desire. If you don't challenge the desire to eat the cookie, if you don't challenge the thought that I want the cookie, then you get to keep the cookie. And if you keep eating the cookie for no justifiable reason, you're addicted. And addiction slowly undermines your ability to function in the real world, which means you're going to get you're going to get overweight, you're going to have a false sense image, you're going to have a false sense of identity, you're going to have neurotic dependency on pleasure in order to escape the moment, right? Like this is all of this is critically important for you to understand as soon as possible, because the trajectory that we're headed, it seems like, is that we have become so addicted that the thought of breaking our addiction is life-threatening. And until we break our addiction, we won't actually save ourselves from ourselves, which is essentially a long-form suicide. And you might say, this is Mitch, this is hyperbolic almost, like don't make this bigger than what it is. And I challenge you just right now, just to deal with yourself. And the fact that, are you multitasking right now? Why can't you just sit and listen to me? Right? And you'd say, oh, Mitch, because like I used, for Mitch personally, I used to work at a golf course and I used to spend hours and hours on a machine by myself cutting grass. And I used to turn to audiobooks and in my iPhone for music and stuff like that to help mediate the boredom, right? And I'm not saying that that's wrong. It's just, is it unconscious? Is it an addiction without knowledge? Because why can't I just sit there and listen to the nothing and just cut the grass? Like, why do I need to multitask? Because I want to get ahead. Because I want to progress. I want to gain information that's going to help me down the road. Well, why do you want to do that? So that when the future comes, I'm prepared for it. Well, why aren't you prepared for the future? Oh, because I don't know enough. Well, why don't you know enough? It's like, when is enough enough? Like, how much do you need to know? And, so it's not as simple as like, oh, good for you for listening to all those books while you sat on the tractor, right? Because running away from the moment only gets you farther and farther away from the moment. And if you're never in the moment, you're never real. And if you're never real, you're never actually engaging with reality. So you're living in an illusion. And this illusion that you're living in is an addiction. You're addicted to the illusion, which is what he's saying. A classic sign of addictive dependency is that you can't live without your illusion. And I challenge you to challenge your illusion. Just don't do the things that you normally do. Stand up against the things that you've done in the past and the thought patterns that you have right now. The next time you have a thought, oh, I want to do something, just challenge it, just for the hell of it. See what happens. See how you react. Because I bet you'll react like the way I can react is like almost like a tantruming child. Like, what do you mean I can't get what I want? Right? And this whole idea of sacrifice is old. Like renunciates or the Mauni in Indian philosophy, they just stopped talking. They flat out stopped talking. And people would say, oh my God, they're renouncing life and they're ascetics and, there's something wrong with them. It's like, well, no. If you think about it, they're challenging what they believe to be true. And in doing so have learned something that they can't communicate anymore. And that's the path they've decided to go on by justifiable reasons. They're the most enlightened people because they're willingly and consciously, potentially willingly and consciously renouncing all experience whatsoever. And that's just something deeply considered. And if it doesn't cause you a little bit of anxiety, then I don't even think you're paying attention to what I'm saying. It's like, imagine that the future was the less of what you want you got, but you did so on purpose. That was your future. Like, that's your future anyways, by the way. If you want to get into the mortality thought line, is that slowly over time, you're going to lose your looks, you're going to lose your efficacy in the world, you're going to lose your money, you're going to lose your power, you're going to lose your friends, you're going to lose your family, you're going to lose everything. Over time, you lose everything. That's what they said in Fight Club. On a long enough timeline, the survival rate of everyone drops to 0. And you might think, well, fuck, that's pretty morbid, Mitch. Like, why are you telling me this? And it's because liberation is on the other side of sacrifice. Liberation from the false reality that you've convinced yourself that you're living in. If you actually want to grow, you need to stop believing that you're right. You have to engage with your thoughts as if they were intruders almost in your house, and you question them, like, what are you doing here? Why are you here? because then you'll see them for what they really are. And when you get closer to reality, you actually engage more with reality, which makes you feel more alive. And the only defense that we have against the nihilistic existential dread of our own death is that living in the moment and having a meaningful experience has some kind of cosmic relationship. There's something beautiful about being honest. It has some valence that's hard to communicate, and addiction is lying. Addiction is a lie, and being honest breaks the addictions. When you're honest with yourself, you break your addictions. You come up with, why am I on social media? Why am I here again? Why am I here? Why am I doing this again? And if you don't question yourself, you're addicted. And there's nothing that people can do for you. You can't help people who don't want to be helped. We should be cautious not to confuse the trees for the forest. The manifestation for the underlying process, the symptoms for the cause. There are no new disorders here, only new targets for the universal and age-old addiction process, new forms of escape. See? I don't want to say I'm right, but fuck, I'm getting close to being right. The mind and brain processes are all the same in all addictions, no matter what form, as in the psycho-spiritual emptiness that resides at the core. Wow. Okay, so did you hear that? The mind and brain processes are the same in all addictions. Remember, you know, who are you going to trust? You got to trust Gabor. He's a doctor. This is what he studied. And like, worst case scenario, if you listen to him, you're gaining more control over your life. So, you know, that's not a bad deal. The mind and brain processes are all the same in all addictions, no matter what form, as in the psycho-spiritual emptiness that resides at the core. So, like, it doesn't matter if you're addicted to masturbation or, you know, reading the newspaper or going for walks or any pattern of behavior that over time diminishes your ability to function in the real world is an addiction. So if the pattern is, I need to, you know, as soon as I finish work, I have a beer and I laze out in front of the TV and relax, quote unquote, is that diminishing your ability to function in the real world, or is it empowering you to function in the real world? This is the question that you have to ask yourself. It's not saying that this is necessarily true for all your behavioral patterns. It's like, why am I having the beer? Just to relax, right? Is that a good enough reason? Or are there things that you're abstaining from doing, responsibilities that you know you need to attend to, that you're not attending to them, and that's going to diminish over time your ability to function in the world, right? It's about being honest. About, if you aren't going to be honest with yourself about why you're doing what you're doing, you're already addicted. Honesty. You have to be honest as often as possible, especially with yourself, about why. And if you don't, then you're going to have the psycho-spiritual emptiness. That's the symptom. And no amount of addiction escape, right, is going to free you from the emptiness. What the data look like is a society gripped by despair, with a surge of unhealthy behaviors and epidemic of drugs. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman wrote in the New York Times, "How are we to address the manifestations of despair without understanding the despair itself?" Wow, there's another great line. How are we to address the manifestations of despair without understanding the despair itself? And what's motivating the despair itself? Right? I think it has something to do with this. It's that you know you're doing this. That's what causes you to despair. Like, you've become self-conscious. You know that you have a finite amount of time, and you're still doing things that diminish your fucking life. That's why addiction is so devastating, because you know better, and yet you continue doing it anyway. And I'm not trying to be like pedantic and tell you that this is your fault. This is my lived out experience. I'm talking to myself. I know that I have things that I need to stop doing, and I'm not stopping, and it's fucking me up. And I'm trying to share this with you with the hope that you can gain some perspective on your own personal behavior so that you can get out of the despair, because the despair is just, it's this, in the worse it is, the better it could be. It's inverted. We just lost the joy. There's no joy in addiction. There's this sick fucking pleasure in addiction. Real joy manifests as something that's non-taking, right? Like it's a giving of yourself, a celebration of something. Joy is just shared. Addictions are kept. Addictions are like held on to, and they're private, and I don't want anybody to know they exist. And so I just wonder if you consider this going forward, is like, what are you addicted to? Because addiction is motivated by fear. Fear of not getting what you want. But if you don't want to get anything, you no longer are addicted, and you actually do gain tremendous efficacy in the real world. The circumstances that promote despair, and potentially therefore addiction, are, with each decade, more and more entrenched in the industrialized world. From the east to the west, more isolation and loneliness, less communal contact, more stress, more economic insecurity, more inequality, more fear, and ultimately more pressure on and less support for young parents. There is more and more disconnect to face the pseudo-connectivity of our technological age. As the magazine Adbusters Riley noted in a recent issue, you have 2,672 friends and an average of 30 likes per post and no one to have dinner with on Saturday. Ha 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 ha. Right? See? I mean, like, you probably already intuited all this. Like, what does he mean when he says, and you probably feel the same way too, the circumstances that promote despair are more entrenched in the industrialized world. Well, one thing that I've come to realize, and I would like to hear your guys' opinion on this, is here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase this here and write it out so you can see it. So I'm very interested in this claim that I'm going to make, which is, you can't think your way out of thinking. That's a cycle. It goes around and around and around. And that is what is becoming more entrenched in the industrialized world, is this cycle of meaningless thought. Meaningless meaning you don't have a meaning. You don't know why you're doing it. You're just doing it because you've done it, and you're doing it because you've done it. And so this pattern of behavior is making you feel more and more despairing over time because it's not real. To think your way out of thinking is like drying dry clothes. They're already dry. Stop thinking. Engage with the real world. Stop multitasking. Slow down and do the next thing that you need to do. And trust that that's enough. Because you realize, I'm pretty sure you understand that this has a lot to do with why you do what you do. Because you don't trust things. You have a profound lack of trust. People who have faith have more trust because they have faith that there is some moving piece that they can't control, but it's beneficent and it believes in them. But in a lot of atheistic culture, like the one that we have now, there is no trust. You don't even trust the government anymore, or modern science, for Christ's sakes. You don't trust modern science because of this hiccup. Again, this repeated pattern of behavior where we go on the internet to find the truth. There's no truth on the internet. The internet is an escape. If you're trying to build a shed in your backyard and you realize, oh shit, I actually don't know how to do this, you can go on YouTube and watch videos about how to build a shed. But no amount of YouTube watching is going to build the shed. You have to then build the shed. If you go on social media and you see people talking about, the government is corrupt and modern science isn't to be trusted, or the alternative, the government is we have to believe the government and we have to believe modern science. It doesn't matter how much time you spend on social media. You then have to go and engage with the government. If you don't engage with the government, you're not being real. You're lying. You're just addicted to a pattern of thought that you've never questioned. You just go on social media and you get pat on the back for being on social media, and then you're like, yay, I'm right. And you know that's ridiculous. But that's exactly what you do. That's what you do every day because you're addicted to it. You're so addicted to it, you don't even realize it. And that's what's devastating, and that's what he's talking about here. And this guy is observing human behavior. Like, he's not entering the minds of these addicts. He's accumulating observational data that he's then using as like axiomatic to point at and say that these potentially work and are scaling. They work for people who aren't quote unquote addicted too. Because addiction is just, in my opinion, just a pattern of behavior that over time diminishes your ability to function in the real world. So, like, think about it. If you go on social media to learn how to build a shed and you stay on social media, you're never going to build the shed. Right? Does that make sense? And until you build the shed, you won't understand what they're trying to teach you on social media. So it's better to go on social media and the internet sparingly, only for inspiration or information with which you can then attend to the real world. Because if you spend too much time on social media, you're really literally, quite literally wasting your whole life. And waste is such an interesting word to me. Waste. You're wasting your life on social media. It doesn't matter if you're hanging out with your cousins who you don't see very often. You know, they're not real. Okay, you are real. Attend to the things that are real first and build a pattern of behavior that makes things more real first, and then go talk to your cousins on social media. That's my opinion. So I'm just, and if you want to debate it, for sure, that's why I'm doing this, part of the reason. It's striking that here in the downtown east side, where at some facilities drugs can be tested before users inject them, many still choose to inject even knowing their substances contain potentially deadly components. To understand why, we must look for the ultimate causes, the ones impelling people to substance abuse and to addictions of all sorts in the first place. We need to talk about what drives people to take drugs. The famed trauma research Dr. Basil van der Kolk has said, people who feel good about themselves don't do things that endanger their bodies. Traumatized people feel agitated, restless, tight in the chest. You hate the way you feel. You take drugs in order to stabilize your body. That is the desperation. You need to regulate one's body and mind to escape unbearable distress or unrest. As shown in the pages of this book, it activates all addictions, substance related or not. See, and I mean, I'm spending quite a bit of time on this page, but I feel like it's necessary. People who feel good about themselves don't do things that endanger their bodies. Diminishes one's ability to function in the real world. I'm sure I'm pointing this out performatively a bit because, like, does it make sense? Why the hell would you do something that endangers yourself unless you didn't want to ask yourself why? If you were too afraid to be honest, if you did not have trust in your ability to function in the world. See, addiction is a symptom of a deeper problem, that you're not okay where you are. The question is, well, why are you not okay where you are? Why can you not be present? Think about that deeply. That is a question that I basically implore you to ask yourself. Why can I not be here now? Why? Right? I'm not going to ask you what you were addicted to, I often say to people, nor when, nor for how long, only whatever your addictive focus. What did it offer you? What did you like about it? What in the short term did it give you that you craved or liked so much? And universally, the answers are, it helped me escape emotional pain, helped me deal with stress, gave me peace of mind, a sense of connection with others, a sense of control. Such responses illuminate that addiction is neither a choice nor primarily a disease. It originates in a human being's desperate attempt to solve a problem, the problem of emotional pain, of overwhelming stress and loss of connection, loss of control, a deep discomfort with the self. People used to turn to God for this kind of solutions, right? And here we are, as Nietzsche said, killed God. You see this? It originates in a human being's desperate attempt to solve a problem. The problem of emotional pain, of overwhelming stress, of loss of connection, of loss of control, of a deep discomfort with the self. In short, it is forlorn attempt to solve the problem of human pain. Pain is something that I'm very interested in. I've meditated into pains. Like, when you are outside and your hands get cold, and then you go inside and they warm up, and it's that excruciating, expansive pain in your hands. Well, I've meditated many times into the pain of that. I just sit down and close my eyes and meditate into it. And it's incredibly transcendent experience that the pain diffuses, it loses its grinding grip on my hands, and it seems to flow outside of my body. It actually makes the pain less painful when you attend to it. That means, like, allow it to exist and observe it as if it was just something that was existing. That's the pain. Like, if you take, for example, the cookie thing, between you and the cookie is a choice. Well, if that moment before you take the cookie, you meditated, you would actually stop yourself from having the cookie. Because the meditation diffuses the focus, right? The reason you want the cookie is so laser beam focused that you can't see anything else. The reason that you're addicted to things is because you cannot see anything else. You're so focused on the addiction, on relieving or gaining that pleasure or that escape, is so focused that you can't perceive anything else. That can be mitigated by meditation, which is a diffusive experience. It's basically like, if you, right now, you're listening to me talk to you, you can hear my voice. Just squeeze one of your hands. Just hold it in front of you and squeeze it as tightly as you can. Keep squeezing it. Can you feel your hand? Can you feel your hand being squeezed? Do you feel the compression in your fingers and in your wrist and in your forearm? Can you see, like, the pink of the skin versus the white of the skin, or whatever color tones they change depending on your complexion? Can you feel your fingernails digging into the palms of your hands? Are you squeezing it? Are you squeezing it? Are you squeezing it? Because I'm going to ask you to release it soon, and I want you to pay attention to where all does that energy go. When you release your hand, where does that energy go? Doesn't it go out and out, out and out, down your arm, out your fingers? The release, the relief. Pain is when you squeeze your fist. Meditation is when you let go. So when you let go, all of a sudden, it's not as localized. It doesn't matter as much. It only matters because you're laser beam focused on it. But that's not good if you know that whatever you're laser beam focused on has disserved you in the past. Just because something is good doesn't mean it's good for you. In fact, it's almost always the case that what you think is good is actually bad for you, and it's wasting your time or hurting your health. You have just convinced yourself that it's important, and that's the same thing as squeezing your hand. You've been squeezing your hand your whole life. You've been holding your breath your whole life. You've been afraid your whole life. You've been addicted to thought your whole life, and you need to let go. And the only way to let go is to meditate. And I think that that's one of the solutions to pain, is to meditate. So, I would love to hear your opinions on this, because this is what he's talking about, right? People turn to pleasure to escape pain. Well, what happens if you could be present with pain? What kind of a mindset would that be? And all behaviors of addiction, substance dependent or not, whether to gambling, sex, internet, or cocaine, either soothe pain directly or distract from it, right? Either soothe or distract. So instead of soothe or distract, attend. rather than soothe or distract. I'm going to say meditate or attend, observe. Okay, this is what you do instead. Don't placate it, don't make yourself feel better, and don't run away from it. Go right into it. Go right into it and be present with it. Even the most harmful addictions serve a vital adaptive function or for dislocated individuals. How much more? Okay, I got quite a bit here. So I'm going to stop it here. I'm going to make a little mark here that this is where we ended. And I'll do more next time. But I hope that this is helpful for you. And if you have any questions or thoughts, I would love to hear them. So please feel free to share them with me.